Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that, well, continues to be really relevant even today.
It does.
We're going to be exploring the concept of unlawful killing in Islam. And to guide us on this journey, we have Sahih Bukhari, Book 83.
Which is all about blood money.
Yes, blood money. Um, you know, at first glance, blood money might seem like, well, kind of a dry, legalistic kind of topic.
It does, doesn't it?
But as we get into it, we're going to discover so much more.
Absolutely, yeah. Within these pages, you find, I think, a deep exploration of the sanctity of life, justice, mercy, and also, what it means to be a Muslim in a world where, well, conflict and violence are just unavoidable. It's a reality.
Yeah, you've already piqued my curiosity. So maybe for our listener who might not be too familiar with Sahih Bukhari, you can just give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, so Sahih Bukhari is considered one of the most authentic collections of the Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, sayings and actions.
And this was compiled.
This was compiled by Imam Bukhari in the 9th century. And for centuries, really, scholars and everyday Muslims have turned to this book for guidance on a range of matters, from ritual practices to social issues, legal rulings, and yes, as we're going to see, even the very important topic of unlawful killing.
Okay, that's great. So we're dealing with a text that carries a lot of weight, in the Muslim world. So where do we even begin in Book 83?
Well, right from the beginning, actually, the first hadith, it really sets the tone for the whole book, and it paints a vivid picture, too. A man approaches the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, seeking knowledge, and he asks him, what are the greatest sins in the eyes of Allah?
Like a scene straight out of history.
It is. Someone seeking wisdom from a revered figure, right?
I can almost picture it. So what does the Prophet say?
The Prophet, he doesn't hesitate. And he responds with a clear hierarchy of sins, starting with the most grievous, which is associating partners with Allah.
And this is also known as?
Also known as shirk. And this is considered to be the ultimate betrayal of faith in Islam.
Placing anything or anyone on par with the one God.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's at the top of the list, the absolute worst sin. What comes next?
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The Prophet, he says that the second greatest sin is to take a life unjustly.
Wow.
To kill someone who has no right to be killed, to violate the sanctity of human life without a just cause, well, that is an act that ranks just below shirk in its severity.
That's a powerful statement. It really puts into perspective how seriously Islam takes the preservation of life.
Yeah.
So shirk is at the top, and then unlawful killing is the second greatest sin. Does the hadith go on to list any others?
It does, yeah. The man, eager to learn more, he asks, what is next? And the Prophet, peace be upon him, he responds, to kill your son, lest he should share your food with you.
Oh, wow.
And when asked again, what is next, he says to commit illegal sexual intercourse with the wife of your neighbor.
Okay, so we have a clear picture of the top four.
We do.
Shirk, unlawful killing, killing one's own child out of fear of poverty, and then adultery. Each one a violation of some fundamental principle in Islam. What I find really, really striking is how the Prophet, right from the start, establishes the gravity of taking a life unjustly.
It is.
It's not just condemned, it's placed right next to the most egregious violation of faith.
And it's fascinating because this ranking of sins wasn't just like the Prophet's opinion. It was actually confirmed later by divine revelation.
Really?
Yeah, so Allah revealed a verse in the Quran, specifically in Surah Al-Furqan, verse 68, and it reinforces this very same teaching.
So it's like this concept of the sanctity of life is woven into the very fabric of Islamic teachings?
Yeah.
Through the Prophet's words and the divine revelation of the Quran.
Exactly. The Quranic verse explicitly forbids the taking of a life that Allah has made sacred except for a just cause. And it also warns of, severe consequences both in this life and in the hereafter for those who transgress this divine command.
It makes me think about how, in our modern world, we often see situations where, well, the value of life seems to be, diminished, whether it's through violence or war, or even just, a disregard for basic human rights. This hadith serves as, well, such a potent reminder of the absolute value that Islam places on human life.
It does, yeah. And this theme actually continues in the subsequent hadiths as well.
Yeah.
So in Hadith 2, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he states that a faithful believer remains at liberty regarding his religion unless he kills somebody unlawfully.
Whoa, what does that mean? at liberty regarding his religion.
It's a profound statement,
Yeah.
and it suggests that the act of taking an innocent life without any justification, I mean, a justification that's recognized by Islamic law, it can really jeopardize the very essence of a believer's faith and their standing with Allah.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
But it also kind of underscores the weight that Islam places on aligning your actions with the principles of faith.
Yes.
It's not just about belief.
It's about embodying those beliefs.
Yeah. In your conduct, particularly when it comes to something as fundamental as respecting human life.
Absolutely. And this point is, emphasized even further in Hadith 3, which warns that unlawfully taking a life is among the evil deeds with dire consequences from which there is no escape.
No escape. That sounds ominous.
Yeah. And it emphasizes the accountability, right?
Yep.
And the repercussions that await those who engage in such acts. It's not something you can just brush aside or easily forgive. The consequences, again, both in this life and the next, are significant.
Okay, so we've seen how these first three hadiths establish a clear foundation. Unlawful killing is a grave sin,
Second only to shirk.
and it carries severe consequences from which there is no escape. It sounds like this is not a topic that's taken lightly at all.
Not at all. And it's as if to underscore this, Hadith 4 adds another layer. It tells us that on the Day of Judgment, when all of humanity is gathered and they have to account for their actions, well, judgments concerning bloodshed will be among the first to be decided.
So it's not just that this sin is severe, it's that it's given priority in the final reckoning. Why is that?
I think it speaks to the profound impact that these acts of violence have, not just on those who are involved, but on society as a whole, right? The shedding of innocent blood, it disrupts the very fabric of our communities. It creates fear and mistrust and leaves scars that can last for generations. It's a matter that demands immediate attention and resolution, both in this life and in the next.
You know, it makes me think about how even in our modern legal systems, murder trials, they often take precedence, reflecting, a similar understanding of the gravity of taking a life.
It does.
I'm really curious to see how these general principles play out in specific situations. Do the hadiths we're looking at, do they kind of go into, different scenarios?
They absolutely do. In fact, as we move further into Book 83, we're going to encounter a series of scenarios and judgments that provide a more in-depth exploration of unlawful killing in Islam.
Perfect. Let's dive into those.
Okay, so we've established the severity of unlawful killing in Islam. Now I think it's time to kind of see how these principles are applied in more specific situations.
Yeah, get into some more of the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. And Hadith 5 presents a particularly compelling case. It's one that actually unfolds on the battlefield, and it involves Al-Miqdad. He's a companion of the Prophet, and he fought bravely in the Battle of Badr.
The Battle of Badr. That was a pivotal moment in early Islamic history.
It was.
A clash between, the fledgling Muslim community and the powerful Quraysh tribe of Mecca.
Right. The stakes were very high, and the fighting was intense. Now, in this hadith, Al-Miqdad, he poses this hypothetical question to the Prophet. He says, imagine, you are facing an enemy combatant. You are locked in this fierce struggle, and the enemy strikes your hand, severing it with his sword. And in a desperate plea for mercy, he seeks refuge under a tree and declares, I have surrendered to Allah. The question is, can you kill him after he has uttered those words?
It's a question that's really born out of that raw reality of war.
It is.
Where life and death hang in the balance. You're forced to consider, the limits of self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
When does mercy prevail, even in the midst of conflict? So what does the Prophet say?
So the Prophet's answer is immediate and unequivocal. He commands Al-Miqdad, do not kill him. And Al-Miqdad, maybe still caught up in that hypothetical scenario, he presses the point, and he argues that, the enemy, he only uttered that declaration of faith after he was wounded, after he lost the upper hand. And yet the Prophet's stance, it remains firm. Do not kill him.
It's such a powerful statement about the sanctity of life, even when we're talking about the heat of battle.
It is.
That declaration of faith, accepting Islam, it acts as this immediate shield, the boundary that cannot be crossed. Almost as if in that moment of surrender, the enemy combatant, he steps out of the realm of hostility and into a space of protection.
Absolutely. It highlights this transformative power of faith and the recognition of that transformation even amidst the chaos of war. And, the Prophet's response reminds Al-Miqdad that, they too were once in a position of vulnerability, concealing their faith back in Mecca before the migration to Medina. It's a subtle, but I think profound call for empathy. It's recognizing that shared humanity that really binds even those who are on opposing sides.
So the hadith goes beyond just like a legal ruling.
It does, yeah.
It's a lesson in forgiveness,
It is.
recognizing the potential for change,
Yeah.
and embracing the transformative power of faith.
And as we move to Hadith 6, we see this thread of mercy kind of woven into the fabric of human history. Here, the prophet, he links the act of unlawful killing back to the very first murder that was committed on earth, the story of Cain and Abel.
A story that really speaks to that primal nature of violence, the darkness that can reside within the human heart.
Absolutely. And the prophet explains that, whenever an innocent life is taken unjustly, a share of the burden of that sin falls upon the first son of Adam, who established this tragic legacy of bloodshed. It's as if the weight of that first act of fratricide, it continues to echo throughout time, reminding us of the profound consequences of violence and the interconnectedness of human actions.
It's a powerful reminder that our choices, our actions, they don't exist in isolation.
No,
They ripple outward,
Yeah.
impacting not just ourselves, but generations to come.
Yeah.
That's a heavy thought. But if this story from the dawn of humanity teaches us the gravity of unlawful killing, what about the potential for violence, let's say, within the Muslim community itself?
Right.
Do the Hadiths address that?
They certainly do. So in Hadith 7 and 8, the Prophet, peace be upon him, addresses his followers during the farewell pilgrimage. This was a moment of immense significance, right? He's preparing them for his eventual passing. And knowing that his departure would leave a void, he urges them with a sense of urgency. He says, "After me, do not become disbelievers by striking the necks of one another."
It's like a poignant plea for unity, a warning against the dangers of internal conflict.
Yeah.
He understood that the loss of his leadership could potentially, fracture the community, lead to discord and violence.
Exactly. And his words resonate, I think, even more so today, where we see so much sectarian violence, internal conflicts within the Muslim community.
Yeah.
These hadiths serve as a timeless reminder that preserving unity, upholding the sanctity of life within the Muslim community it's just paramount.
Okay, so we've gone from general principles to specific scenarios, even touching upon the potential for conflict within the Muslim community. Is there anything else in these early hadiths that kind of stands out to you?
There's a recurring motif in these early hadiths that I find really compelling. It's the listing of major sins, what are known as al-kaba'ir in Arabic. And hadiths 9 and 10, they actually provide two such lists. And what's striking is that unlawful killing consistently ranks among the most grievous sins alongside shirk and disobedience to parents.
So it's not just some random sin that's tucked away in the middle of the list.
Yeah.
It's right up there at the top, alongside the most serious transgressions in Islam.
Exactly. And it speaks to that profound weight that Islam places on preserving life and upholding the principles of justice and compassion. It's a clear reminder that violence, taking a life without justification, is an act with profound consequences, both for the individual, of course, but for the community as a whole.
It makes me think about how these lists of major sins, they act as a kind of moral compass.
Yeah.
Guiding believers towards a life of righteousness.
Yeah.
And reminding them of the boundaries that they just cannot cross. But I'm curious to see how these principles kind of play out, in the lives of the Prophet's companions.
Yeah.
Are there any stories that illustrate these concepts in action?
There are several, yeah. But one that really stands out is the story of Usama bin Zayd. He was a young warrior highly regarded by the Prophet. And it's a tale that really grapples with the complexities of war, the heat of battle, and then the enduring power of mercy.
This is the story where he kills a man during battle, even after the man utters the Islamic declaration of faith, right?
Yes, that's right. It's a story that's full of tension and even a bit of moral ambiguity. So Usama, he describes how he and another companion were in hot pursuit of this enemy combatant during a battle. And as they close in on their target, the man, fearing for his life, utters the words, "La ilaha illallah," there is no God but Allah.
The very essence of Islam.
It is the declaration of faith that, marks entry into the Muslim community. Now, the Ansari companion, he recognizes the weight of those words. He hesitates, but Usama, he's caught up in the adrenaline of the chase. He doesn't hesitate. He plunges his spear into the man, ending his life.
It's a heart-wrenching moment. You can almost feel those conflicting emotions. The urgency of battle, the ingrained reflexes of a warrior, and then the sudden realization of what has just happened. What's the Prophet's reaction when he learns of this incident?
So his reaction is immediate. And it's filled with sorrow. He repeatedly questions Usama, did you kill him after he had said, La ilaha illallah?
Right.
And it's just this moment of, I think, profound disappointment, almost a sense of betrayal of the very principles that he had been trying to instill in his followers.
What's striking to me is that the Prophet doesn't downplay the seriousness of what Usama has done.
No.
He doesn't offer excuses. He directly confronts the act, highlighting that transgression, even amidst the complexities of war.
It reinforces the idea that even in the most challenging situations, the sanctity of life, it must be upheld. Once a person declares their faith in Islam, their life, it becomes inviolable. It's a very powerful message. It's a line drawn in the sand that really underscores the power of faith and the imperative of mercy, even in the midst of conflict.
It makes me think about the challenges that we face in the modern world where, well, violence often seems to be like the default response to any kind of conflict. This story from the early days of Islam, it offers, I think, a powerful counter-narrative. It's a reminder that mercy and restraint, these things must guide our actions even in the most difficult of situations.
Absolutely. And this emphasis on abstaining from unlawful killing isn't limited to the battlefield. In Hadith 12, we actually learn about the Pledge of Allegiance taken by the early Muslims. This was a solemn commitment made to the Prophet. And among the vows that they made was this commitment to refrain from unlawful killing, a promise to uphold the sanctity of life in their community and beyond.
This pledge, the diyyah, it was more than just like a symbolic gesture.
It was.
It was a binding agreement. It was a testament to the core values that held that early Muslim community together. It's fascinating to kind of think about how this ancient oath kind of resonates with, oaths taken by soldiers or law enforcement officers, even those who are elected into public office.
Yeah, that commitment to protect life, to uphold justice, it really transcends time and culture. It speaks to a very fundamental aspect of human society. The need for order, safeguarding the vulnerable, and ensuring that power is not used to inflict harm, but actually to protect and preserve.
But what happens when that commitment is broken?
Right.
What happens when, let's say, the boundaries of the Muslim community are transgressed and violence kind of erupts from within?
Yeah.
Do the hadiths address that?
They do. In Hadith 13, the Prophet draws a very clear line. He states, "Whoever carries arms against us is not from us." It's a declaration that those who engage in violence against Muslims, those who threaten the peace and security of the community, they place themselves outside the fold of Islam. Their actions negate their claims of belonging.
It's a powerful statement that kind of defines the limits of tolerance, the boundaries of acceptance. It acknowledges that while Islam emphasizes forgiveness and mercy, there are acts that are so egregious, so destructive, that they sever the bonds of community.
Absolutely. And this brings us to, I think, one of the most somber topics addressed in Book 83, the issue of fighting between Muslims. It's a reality that sadly continues to plague the Muslim world today.
Yeah, it's a tragic reality.
It is.
One that seems to contradict the very essence of Islam's message of peace and unity. So what do the hadiths say about this internal conflict?
So, in Hadith 14, the Prophet addresses this very directly, and he declares that if two Muslims engage in a fight that leads to one killing the other, both the killer and the killed will be in hellfire.
That's a stark warning.
It is.
It's meant to deter Muslims from turning against each other. But why? Why would the one who was killed also be condemned to hellfire?
Right. So the Prophet goes on to explain that the one who was killed was also filled with rage, this desire to kill their opponent. So both parties, they harbored ill intentions, this willingness to take a life. It's a reminder that violence is not just about the physical act, but it's about the state of the heart. It's the intention that drives the hand that strikes the blow.
So it's not just about who delivers that fatal blow.
No.
It's about the shared responsibility for creating that environment of hatred, of animosity that leads to violence. It's a call for Muslims to really examine their hearts, to root out the seeds of anger and resentment before they blossom into acts of aggression.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, Hadiths 15, 16, and 18 present a series of cases involving Jews who had committed murder. And these stories offer insights into the application of justice in a pluralistic society, the complexities of interfaith relations, and the Prophet's role as a just ruler.
It's interesting to see how the principles of Islamic law are applied in a context where Muslims are interacting with people of other faiths. Are these cases treated any differently because they involve non-Muslims?
No, they're not. So in each of these cases, the prophet meticulously investigates, he's seeking evidence, he questions witnesses, and he makes sure that the perpetrators are held accountable for their crimes, regardless of, their religious background. It shows that the principles of justice, of accountability for taking a life, apply equally to all those who reside under Islamic jurisdiction.
So it's not about preferential treatment or religious bias. It's
Yeah.
about upholding this universal standard of justice,
It is.
ensuring that everyone is treated fairly and that the sanctity of life is protected for all.
Exactly. But I think it's also important to remember the historical context in which these events take place.
Hmm.
The prophet wasn't just a religious leader.
Yeah.
He was also the head of state in Medina, responsible for governing this very diverse community that included various tribes and religious groups.
So while these judgments reflect the principles of Islamic law, they also offer insights into the challenges of leadership, diplomacy, conflict resolution in a pluralistic society.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of specific circumstances, Hadith 17 outlines 3 situations where a Muslim's life may be taken lawfully according to Islamic jurisprudence.
Okay, I definitely want to hear about these 3 situations.
All right, so the Prophet, peace be upon him, states that the blood of a Muslim who confesses the oneness of Allah and his prophethood is inviolable except in 3 cases. Qisas, which is retaliation for murder, a married person who commits adultery, and apostasy, the act of renouncing Islam.
These are considered very serious offenses within Islam,
They are.
each carrying, severe consequences that in some cases can include the death penalty. And it's a reminder that while Islam emphasizes mercy and forgiveness, it also recognizes the need for justice and accountability, particularly when we're talking about acts that really threaten the very fabric of society.
And it's also important to acknowledge that these are complex and sensitive issues.
Yeah.
There's ongoing debates among scholars regarding their interpretation and application. The nuances of Islamic jurisprudence are vast. And these debates, I think they reflect this dynamic nature of interpreting sacred texts and applying them to ever-evolving social contexts.
It's a good reminder that while these texts provide guidance, they also require careful study, nuanced understanding, and a thoughtful application. But before we move on, can we just go back to something you mentioned earlier, this concept of qisas, retaliation for murder? Can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on that? What exactly does that entail?
Yeah, qisas is a complex concept that basically allows the family of a murder victim to demand the execution of the murderer as a form of retribution.
Okay.
It's rooted in the principle of an eye for an eye, and it aims to establish a sense of balance and justice by kind of mirroring the harm that was inflicted.
It sounds like a rather harsh concept, especially in our modern world, where we tend to really prioritize rehabilitation over retribution. But how does this concept fit within the broader Islamic emphasis on mercy and forgiveness?
That's a great question. And it highlights that tension that often exists between the demands of justice and then the call for compassion. So while qisas is permissible under Islamic law, it's not the only option.
Okay.
In fact, Islam strongly encourages forgiveness and reconciliation as a way to heal and find peace.
So it's not like a mandatory requirement,
No.
but rather an option that the victim's family can choose.
Absolutely. And the concept of blood money, what we're talking about now, diyyah plays a significant role in this process. So diyyah is this form of financial compensation that's paid to the victim's family as a means of, seeking that forgiveness, reconciling. And it offers an alternative to qisas. It's a way to acknowledge the harm that was done while also breaking that cycle of violence and hopefully fostering a more harmonious society.
It's interesting to see how these concepts work together,
They do.
providing this framework for both justice and mercy, accountability and forgiveness.
Yeah, and this balance, I think, is beautifully illustrated in Hadith 19, which recounts a very significant incident that took place during the conquest of Mecca.
Okay.
This was, a pivotal moment in Islamic history, marking the Prophet's triumphant return to his birthplace after years of, exile and persecution.
I can only imagine the emotions that must have been running high during that time. The sense of victory, longing for home, that desire for justice after years of suffering.
Absolutely. And amidst this momentous occasion, a man from the tribe of Kuza, driven by this this desire for revenge. He kills a man from the tribe of Banu Layth. His act was fueled by this long-standing feud that stretched back to the pre-Islamic era, a time when, tribal rivalries and these cycles of violence were very common.
It's a reminder that even in moments of triumph, the shadows of the past can linger, right? Threatening to reignite these old conflicts and perpetuate that cycle of bloodshed.
They do. But the prophet, witnessing this act of vengeance, he immediately steps forward to address the crowd, and he declares Mecca a sanctuary, a sacred space where fighting is absolutely forbidden. It's a bold statement. It's a clear break from the past, a step towards establishing this new order that's rooted in peace and justice.
It's almost as if with that declaration, he's drawing this line between, the old ways of violence and retribution and a new era of peace and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
But was this a permanent declaration? Or was it, specific to that particular moment in time?
So he makes it clear that this prohibition against fighting in Mecca, it applies to everyone, both before and after him. He acknowledges that he was granted this temporary exception on that day of conquest. But from that point forward, Mecca would be a place of peace, a sanctuary that's dedicated to the worship of Allah.
So he's establishing a clear precedent.
He is.
A model for conflict resolution that prioritizes forgiveness over retaliation, peace over violence.
Mm-hmm.
But how does he address the specific act of revenge that took place? The man who was killed in retaliation for a past wrong.
So rather than condoning that act of revenge, the prophet emphasizes the importance of forgiveness and reconciliation by highlighting the option of blood money diyyah. He's reminding people that while justice demands accountability, mercy offers a path to healing and peace.
It's a powerful example of how, Islamic teachings provide this framework for navigating these complex situations.
Mm-hmm.
They acknowledge the validity of seeking justice,
Right,
while also encouraging forgiveness and reconciliation as a way to break that cycle of violence.
And this concept of blood money as an alternative to retaliation, it's explored further in Hadith 20, which draws a comparison between the approach of the children of Israel and that of the Muslims.
It's always fascinating to see how Islamic teachings kind of draw upon earlier traditions,
Mm-hmm.
while also offering distinct perspectives.
They do. So in this hadith, the prophet explains that, for the children of Israel, the punishment for murder was qisas only, the law of equality in punishment, an eye for an eye, a life for a life.
Yeah.
But for Muslims, Allah introduced this new dimension of mercy and forgiveness through the concept of blood money.
So while qisas remains an option, the family of the victim also had the choice to accept diyyah.
It did.
As a means of reconciliation.
Absolutely.
A way to kind of acknowledge the wrong that was done while also choosing that path of forgiveness.
And this choice, I think, reflects this core value in Islam, the encouragement of forgiveness, compassion, even when you're facing, these very grievous wrongs.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to the central theme of our deep dive, the absolute prohibition of unlawful killing in Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And Hadith 21, it reiterates this point very powerfully by listing those who seek to shed blood unjustly among the most hated by Allah.
It's a stark reminder of the severity of this transgression, and that divine displeasure it incurs. It's a message that, it resonates across time, I think, reminding us of the consequences of our actions.
Yeah.
And that need to align our choices with principles of justice and compassion and the preservation of life.
And as we move forward in Book 83, we're going to encounter several stories that I think showcase the human side of conflict, the tragedy of accidental killings, and the importance of seeking forgiveness and Allah's mercy in such situations.
Let's delve into those stories. I'm eager to see how these principles play out, in the lives of ordinary people, how they grapple with loss, grief, and the complexities of seeking both justice and forgiveness.
These stories of accidental killings, well, they really offer, I think, a different perspective, a different lens through which to view this whole concept of unlawful killing. Because, well, we're not talking about intentional harm,
right,
or malice. It's almost as if fate or circumstance play a tragic hand.
Yeah.
And I think they force us to grapple with those questions of accountability, forgiveness, the limits of what we can actually control as humans. And one of the most poignant examples is found in Hadiths 22 and 28. They recount a very heartbreaking incident that happens during the Battle of Uhud.
The Battle of Uhud. Now, wasn't that a particularly difficult battle for the Muslims?
It was.
I mean, they faced a lot of setbacks.
Yeah.
They did. A lot of losses. It was a pivotal moment in the early history of Islam, a real test of faith, of resilience. And amidst all the chaos and confusion of battle, this tragic case of what we would call friendly fire occurred.
Oh, wow.
So Hudayfa bin al-Yaman, he was a companion of the Prophet. He witnessed his own father being mistakenly attacked and killed by fellow Muslims.
It's a chilling reminder that, even with the best of intentions, even among those who share the same faith, who fight for the same cause, mistakes can happen.
They can.
The fog of war can cloud judgment and lead to devastating consequences.
Absolutely. And in this moment of just profound grief and shock, Hudayfa's response is, it's both heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time. So he cries out, my father, my father. But then realizing that, a tragic error had occurred, he immediately adds, may Allah forgive you.
It's an act of extraordinary forgiveness in the face of just unimaginable loss. To witness the death of your own father, to see him struck down by those who are supposed to be your allies, and to still offer words of forgiveness. I mean, it speaks volumes about Hudayfa's character and the depth of his faith.
And the narration goes on to say that Hudayfa continued to pray for Allah's forgiveness for the one who had killed his father, for the rest of his life.
Wow.
And it's a testament to that transformative power of forgiveness, that ability to kind of release yourself from the grip of anger and resentment, even when you're dealing with, profound tragedy.
Yeah, it makes you think about how holding on to anger and bitterness can really poison us from the inside out.
It can.
And Hudayfa's example, his willingness to forgive, it offers a powerful, powerful antidote. It's a reminder that even in those darkest moments, we have a choice to make, right?
You do?
We can either succumb to despair and resentment, or we can choose the path of forgiveness and healing.
Now, shifting to Hadith 29, we encounter another story of a companion who died during battle. But this time, the circumstances, they raise a different set of questions. And this is the story of Amir. He was known for his beautiful singing voice.
Oh, yes. During the expedition to Khaybar, Amir was asked to sing for his fellow companions.
He was.
And the Prophet, hearing his voice, he blessed him, saying, may Allah bestow his mercy upon him. It's such a beautiful image, a moment of joy, of camaraderie amidst the harsh realities of war.
It was. But tragically, Amir was killed the very next morning.
Oh, wow.
And this sudden death, it led some people to wonder whether his good deeds had been erased, whether dying in battle somehow negated all those positive actions of his life.
It's a question that I think reflects a common human concern. The fear that a single act, a moment of violence, can overshadow a lifetime of good deeds.
It can.
It makes me think about how we often wrestle with this idea of redemption, how our final moments might define us in a way.
Right. But the Prophet, upon hearing these concerns, he vehemently refutes this whole notion. And he assures his companions that, Amir's good deeds, they were not lost. In fact, he declares that Amir will receive a double reward because he exerted himself to obey Allah. And he fought in his cause.
Like a powerful statement that really clarifies the status of those who die fighting for the cause of Allah. Their sacrifice is honored, their good deeds are multiplied, their place in paradise is secured.
As we move deeper into Book 83, we encounter a series of hadiths that kind of move away from the battlefield and into the realm of everyday life. We start addressing things like specific injuries, judgments, compensations.
It's fascinating to see how Islamic law provides such detailed guidance even when it comes to these seemingly minor matters.
Right. It really speaks to how comprehensive these teachings are, how relevant they are to all aspects of our human experience. So, for instance, Hadiths 30 and 31, they address the issue of teeth being knocked out during fights. And they offer insight into how Islamic law approaches harm, restitution.
So what happens if you lose a tooth in a fight?
Well, in these hadiths, we see the Prophet carefully considering the circumstances of each case. He's taking into account things like intent, the severity of the injury. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? There's this process of discernment, weighing the evidence, and the judgment, it's tailored to the specific situation.
So it's not about blindly applying a set of rules, there's an element of human judgment,
There is.
consideration of the context and the
Yeah.
intention behind things.
Exactly. And this nuanced approach, it's further illustrated in Hadith 32, which presents a kind of contrasting judgment. In this Hadith, the Prophet, he actually orders retaliation kisses for a girl whose tooth was broken by another girl.
Wait, so in one case where teeth are knocked out, there's this more lenient approach. But in this case where a girl's tooth is broken, there's a call for retaliation.
Mm. Mm.
What accounts for the difference?
It seems that the difference lies in the intent and the severity of the injury. So in those previous cases, the loss of teeth happened during a fight between men. And this kind of implies, maybe a higher level of risk, a degree of acceptance of potential harm. But in this case, involving these two young girls, well, breaking a tooth, that seems to be much more deliberate, maybe malicious, right, and less justifiable.
So the Prophet is taking into account, the vulnerability of the victim, the power dynamics at play, the nature of the act itself. It's not just about the injury. It's about the context in which that injury occurred.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of context and intention in Islamic jurisprudence. It's a reminder that Islamic law isn't simply this, rigid set of rules. It's
Yeah.
this dynamic system that's really seeking to uphold justice, but also considering all those complexities of human behavior and social interaction.
Yeah, I mean, it's this attention to detail, this willingness to grapple with the nuances of human experience that makes these teachings, I think, so relevant, so applicable, even all these centuries later.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of details, Hadiths 33 and 34, they offer us a glimpse into those meticulous considerations within Islamic law regarding the value of different body parts.
Okay.
So they essentially equate the thumb and the little finger in terms of blood money. So the compensation for injuring either one of those would be the same.
Wow. It's amazing to see how Islamic law establishes these very specific guidelines, and all with the aim of creating, a comprehensive system of justice.
It really speaks to that desire to create a society where accountability is paramount, right?
Yeah.
Where harm is not taken lightly, and there are these clear mechanisms for redress, for restitution.
Now, amidst these discussions of injuries and blood money, we come across a hadith that offers a more personal glimpse into the life of the Prophet. And in Hadith 35, we see the Prophet refusing medicine during his final illness.
Right.
And it's this moment that reveals his human vulnerability and that deep, deep connection with his companions.
It's a poignant scene. The Prophet is clearly suffering, yet he firmly refuses to have medicine poured into his mouth. And his companions, they're concerned. Initially, they think his refusal is due to, that common aversion that patients often feel towards medication.
Yeah.
But there's something more to it, right?
It's not just the bad taste of the medicine.
It's not. So when he recovers slightly, he explains why he refused.
Yeah.
And he says, didn't I forbid you to pour medicine into my mouth? And then in this moment of, I think, of both tenderness and gentle humor, he assures them. He says, there is none of you but will be forced to drink medicine, and I will be watching you, except Al-Abbas, for he did not witness this act of yours.
Wow, it's such a beautiful moment that really, really humanizes the Prophet. It reminds us that, even in his final moments, he was so aware of his companions' concerns and that his love for them extended, well beyond this earthly life.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even the most revered figures, they experience pain and vulnerability.
Yeah.
And it highlights that bond of love and respect that existed between the Prophet and his followers. Now, shifting back to the legal side of blood money, Hadith 36 presents an interesting case where the killer of an Ansari man in Khaybar remained unknown. And this kind of highlights the challenges of establishing guilt, when there are no clear witnesses or evidence.
Yeah. So how does Islamic law kind of handle these kinds of situations?
So in this case, the Prophet, he didn't want the blood money to be lost.
Right.
Without compensation to the victim's family. So he decided to pay it himself from the zakat funds.
Zakat being one of the 5 pillars of Islam.
Mm-hmm.
That form of obligatory charity that purifies wealth and supports, those who are in need.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating to see how the Prophet, in this case, uses zakat funds to ensure that justice is served, even when the perpetrator remains unknown.
It really demonstrates his commitment to upholding fairness, preventing undue suffering, even in these very difficult situations. It's a reminder that Islamic law seeks to strike that balance between the rights of the accused and the need to provide redress for the victims of crimes.
And this emphasis on seeking evidence, establishing guilt, it's further explored in Hadith 37, which delves into the concept of qasama. Now, remind us again, what is qasama? How does that work?
So qasama, it's a legal procedure that involves oath-taking. And it's used in cases where there are no direct witnesses to a crime.
Okay.
But there's this strong suspicion against a particular individual or group. So essentially, a certain number of people from the accuser's side will swear oaths. They're attesting to the guilt of the accused.
Okay.
And the number of oaths required. That depends on the nature of the crime and the strength of the suspicion.
So it's a way to ensure that justice is served, even in those cases where there's no clear-cut evidence.
Exactly.
But doesn't it rely very heavily on the honesty and the integrity of those who are taking those oaths?
It does, and that's why Hadith 37 presents this really interesting conversation between Umar bin Abdulaziz. He was a renowned caliph, known for his piety, known for just rule, and Abu Kinaba, who was this respected scholar. And they're discussing the validity of qasama, and they really emphasize the importance of seeking these evidence-based judgments and ensuring that oaths are taken sincerely, with this genuine belief in the truth.
So Islamic law really places a high value on truthfulness, even in the midst of these legal proceedings. And it recognizes that pursuit of justice has to be tempered with this commitment to integrity.
Right.
And a recognition of the fact that, we're human, we make mistakes.
Absolutely. Now, switching gears a little bit, Hadiths 38A, 38B, and 39 address the issue of privacy.
Okay.
And the permissibility of defending your home and your personal space.
These hadiths seem to kind of resonate with, this modern day idea of castle doctrine.
Right.
That's found in some legal systems. Individuals have that right to defend their homes against intruders.
And they highlight, that importance of seeking permission before you enter someone's house, and that right to protect yourself from those who violate that privacy. Islam recognizes the sanctity of the home. It's a place of security, of refuge, and it grants individuals that right to defend that space.
So while Islam emphasizes respect for others and their property,
it does.
It also acknowledges that right to defend your personal space.
It does.
The right to protect yourself from harm.
Right. And this discussion about the boundaries of permissible actions, I think it leads us to Hadith 40, which presents this intriguing conversation between Abu Juhayfa and Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Okay, and Ali, of course, the fourth caliph of Islam, and a close companion of the Prophet, known for his wisdom, for his deep understanding of Islamic teaching. So what were they discussing?
So Abu Juhayfa, he asks Ali if there are any other divine sources of knowledge apart from the Quran. And I think it's a question that reflects how important it is to seek guidance from those authentic sources, to make sure that your beliefs and your actions are really grounded in divine revelation.
It's a question that I think resonates even more today.
Yeah.
In this age of information, misinformation, that need to really discern truth from falsehood. Find those reliable sources of knowledge. It's as relevant as ever, I think.
Absolutely. And Ali's response is, it's insightful, it's thought-provoking. He states that, besides the Quran, we only have the ability to understand it, that gift of reason and intellect that Allah has bestowed upon us. And then he lists these 3 specific areas where they've received guidance: regulations about blood money, ransom for captives, and then this judgment that a Muslim should not be killed he says, for killing a disbeliever.
It's an interesting list. The inclusion of regulations regarding blood money, I think it highlights just how important this concept is, within Islamic jurisprudence. It's not just some minor detail. It's a fundamental aspect of Islamic law, a reflection of the value placed on human life, that need for justice, for accountability.
And those other 2 points, the ransom for captives and then that judgment regarding a Muslim killing a disbeliever, they touch upon issues of war, interfaith relations. And it just demonstrates, I think, the breadth, the depth of Islamic teaching.
Yeah, it's a reminder that Islamic law is not just this set of, abstract principles.
Yeah.
It's a practical guide for living our lives. It addresses these really, really important issues: war and peace, individual rights, social responsibility, justice, mercy.
Moving on to Hadiths 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45, we have this series of rulings regarding causing a miscarriage. And these hadiths, they provide a window, I think, into the sensitivity and the respect that Islam has for unborn life, recognizing that inherent value, establishing this legal framework to address situations where that life is harmed.
So even though a fetus, isn't yet a fully formed human being, its life is still protected. It's valued. And this it challenges the notion that personhood only begins at birth, recognizing that life in the womb, it is sacred. It does deserve our protection.
It does. And in the very detailed nature of these rulings, the specific amounts of compensation that are prescribed, it demonstrates the meticulousness of Islamic law.
Yeah.
How detailed it is, and this desire to create a just and an equitable society.
It's a reminder that Islamic teachings, they're not just about, faith and spirituality.
Yeah.
They encompass, I think, all aspects of our human lives, providing guidance on legal matters, social interactions, and even the most sensitive of ethical dilemmas.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in the midst of all this talk about legal matters, Hadith 46 offers us, I think, this really heartwarming interlude. It's a glimpse into those personal interactions of the Prophet, and this is the story of Anas bin Malik, who served the Prophet from a very young age.
That must have been such an incredible experience, to be so close to the Prophet, witnessing his daily life, learning directly from his example. What kind of insights did Anas share?
So Anas, he describes the Prophet as being kind, patient, gentle. He said he never scolded him, he never criticized him, even when he made mistakes.
Wow.
And it's a testament, I think, to the Prophet's character, his ability to nurture, to guide those around him with love and compassion.
Yeah. It's a reminder that true leadership, it's not just about, authority or power.
Yeah.
It's about embodying those qualities of empathy, of patience, of understanding, creating a space where others feel safe to learn, to grow, even to make mistakes, without that fear of judgment.
Right. And Anas's service to the Prophet, that willingness to dedicate his time, his energy to caring for another person, it really highlights that value that Islam places on service to others.
It's the reminder that even those seemingly small acts of kindness, of generosity, they can be so meaningful. They can have such a profound impact on the lives of those around us.
And it's a message that I think resonates so much in the modern world where individualism often overshadows that importance of community and that value of serving those in need.
Yeah.
So back to the legal aspects of blood money, Hadiths 47 and 48, they address situations where no blood money is due.
Okay.
And this helps to clarify, those boundaries of accountability, recognizing that not all deaths or injuries, they warrant financial compensation.
So are there specific circumstances where this concept of blood money, it just doesn't apply?
Yeah, so these hadiths, they specify that no blood money is required for deaths that are caused by animals, falls, or mining accidents. So these are all situations where, well, there's no human being who's directly responsible.
Right.
It's seen as an act of God or just an unavoidable accident.
Yeah. It reflects that principle that blood money is intended to hold individuals accountable for their actions, provide a means of reconciliation, between the families.
Absolutely.
That are affected by intentional harm.
It ensures that the system of justice, it remains fair, that it's balanced, and it recognizes that not all loss of life can be attributed to human actions.
And this kind of brings us to Hadith 49, which addresses those severe consequences for killing someone under the Muslims' protection.
Right.
Highlighting that Islamic emphasis on honoring agreements and protecting those who have been granted safe passage or asylum.
And the hadith states that whoever kills a muwahid, a person granted protection by the Muslims, they will not smell the fragrance of paradise.
Wow.
And it's such a powerful statement, underscores the gravity of betraying that trust,
Right.
violating the sanctity of a covenant.
It emphasizes that Islamic commitment to upholding those agreements, to providing sanctuary to those seeking refuge, protecting the vulnerable, regardless of their background, of their beliefs.
And then we have Hadith 50, and that this kind of reiterates that earlier conversation between Abu Juhayfa and Ali about the sources of Islamic knowledge, reminding us of the importance of relying on the Prophet's teachings and just that wisdom and that understanding that Allah grants us.
It's a call to seek knowledge from those authentic sources, to engage in deep reflection, in critical thinking, to approach these teachings with humility, with a willingness to learn.
Absolutely. And then finally, as we conclude our exploration of Book 83, we have Hadiths 51 and 52. And these might seem a little bit out of place, in this discussion about unlawful killing and blood money. They actually address the prohibition of favoring one prophet over another.
Right.
Emphasizing the respect, the reverence that Muslims have for all the messengers of Allah.
It seems like an abrupt shift in topic.
It does.
But perhaps they serve as a reminder of that overarching framework within which all Islamic teachings, including those related to justice, the sanctity of life, must be understood.
Respect for all prophets, it's a foundational principle in Islam, and it shapes how Muslims approach all aspects of life, including issues of law, morality, and even those social interactions. It's a reminder that Islam is this comprehensive system of belief, and all of its teachings are interconnected, they reinforce each other.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Sahih al-Bukhari, Book 83, I'm really struck by just the sheer depth and the complexity of this topic. We've covered a lot.
Yeah.
We've explored the absolute prohibition of unlawful killing, the various situations and judgments surrounding it. That emphasis on forgiveness, on reconciliation, the importance of upholding justice, of protecting the vulnerable, and really that nuanced approach that Islamic law takes in addressing these issues of harm and compensation.
Absolutely. It's been an incredible journey through these texts.
It really has.
Yeah.
And what's remarkable to me is how these teachings, they're rooted in this specific historical context.
Yeah.
But they continue to resonate, with so many contemporary issues, offering guidance, offering insight into the challenges we face even in the modern world.
Absolutely. Those principles of respecting life, of seeking justice, of promoting peace, of protecting the vulnerable, they're timeless. They're universal. And they transcend, all these cultural boundaries.
Yeah.
And they speak to I think those deepest aspirations of the human heart.
I'm also really struck by the personal stories that we've encountered along the way. Those glimpses into the lives of the Prophet and his companions, and they remind us that these teachings, they're not just abstract concepts.
No.
They were lived and embodied by real people who grappled with the same questions, the same challenges, the same dilemmas that we face today.
And they add, I think, this layer of depth, this richness to our understanding, helping us connect with these teachings on a more personal level. They remind us that they're not just words on a page, but principles that have shaped lives, inspired actions,
Right.
Offered solace and guidance for centuries.
So for our listener who has joined us on this deep dive, I hope this exploration has really sparked a curiosity, to delve deeper into these profound teachings,
That's
to
it.
reflect on how relevant they are to all of our lives, and to consider how they might inform, our own understanding of justice, of mercy, and the sanctity of life, especially in the modern world.
It has been an absolute privilege to explore these profound teachings with you.
It has.
And may this journey continue to inspire us all to reflect,
Yeah.
to have dialogue, to have a deeper appreciation for the wisdom and the guidance that are contained within these sacred texts.
Thank you for joining us on Echoes of Ihsan. Until next time, may peace and blessings be upon you.